King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts. Thanks for checking in for another Broadcasters Podcast. Thanks for all of you to listen in through this microphone from my studio here in South Florida, USA, and all the things that are going on within the King of Podcasts radio network. So, coming up with the program this week, we're going to talk about a recent study from a consultant about the 10-year music cycle. And it's something he's been actually ongoing and doing. First time I'm going to get to talk about that here on the program. We're going to talk about that from a man named Guy Zapolian that brings up this idea of the 10-year music cycle. We'll bring all that up because we're starting to see the evolution of that 10-year music cycle that always happens at the start of every year. There is something about the change of a decade that always makes it happen. So we've already gone to the first year of the decade, and we already saw and things like happen where we already see what the future brings to us prior to, and then we get to where we are now. So that's the kind of things that we're going through right now. So let's go ahead and talk about that in a minute. We'll also talk about, will movie theaters survive when audiences now can stream new releases? We've been talking about this. More movies are now continuing to be pushed back. And other movies, if you watched any of the football this past weekend, you see what's going on right now with all the movies that are coming out. Like, there was a couple things. You saw movies that were being promoted that were going to be simultaneously released on HBO Max and in theaters. All the Warner Brothers movies, we knew that was going to happen. You're seeing the promos for that right now. Netflix also putting out an ad talking about how they're going to have new movies, a new movie out released every week for the entire year. These are the kind of things that are happening, which is going to go up against the exhibition. And again, movie theaters, they're starting to reopen a little bit. I just saw that in, I think it was Michigan. I think there's going to be some movie theaters reopening right now for AMC theaters. New York and LA are still locked down. So we have all that going on. And, listen, we know there's been some changes when it comes to news and politics, which, by the way, in every industry rag, everybody wants to talk about politics. Okay, everybody wants to talk about the inauguration. That's fine. Listen, it's an important moment. But it's like everything else takes a back seat for it. Okay, but that's basically what they did. Like, every media source took a back seat among their normal, everyday work to talk about the inauguration. And that's understood if you want to have that as a major portion of your content. When it's the only content you put out, that's a different story as well. Just saying. So there's that. And then the World Economic Forum put out a story about the business of media in 2021, how video streaming was a hit during COVID-19. What does that mean for media? Again, the way we are consuming our content, the way we are presenting our content. One of the things I was looking at, just doing some shopping this weekend, when I look at the stores and I see there was a lot of gift ideas this time around. And I forget if it was like this last year, but I think this year more than ever, I saw a lot of ring lights and tripods and different recording gear at different stores where they provided it so that you could, if you're doing content yourself and you're an influencer or you want to do some social media content, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or whatever, or YouTube, that you have ring lights and you have things set up for your phone so you can go and record content. And that's becoming more of a thing. And it's very affordable. Like, I saw the ring lights were next to nothing. And there were all these different kits you put together. It's like, a couple of years ago, it was the selfie stick that people wanted to have. Now, you use your phone to create content and even create a better quality content, better audio, better video, all across the board. Which is why, even myself, I had to step up my game when it came to podcasting because, podcasting now, you are expected to have good quality audio. Especially when you see the competition that's out there, when you see celebrities and other mainstream types trying to jump into the podcasting space and it sounds like ass, they can't be doing that. And then also, most of those podcasters are also taking up the likes of a Joe Rogan idea and doing a video version of it and making where we have an audio version and video, and the priority most likely starts going towards video, and you do the other way around. But of course, I go audio first, video second. And the thing is, when I done video work myself, and that's what I was doing this past year, especially before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of stuff where I was doing video content and I was on camera doing it with a green screen, which I did. And it was fine. I was like, it looks okay. Like I made it work. But again, just me as a talking head doesn't do anything. And I'm not going to do much more in the production to do that. Like I want to be radio centric. So to put it onto a YouTube channel, all I figured to do is let me just put up a slate and I'll just talk over it. And a lot of other places do that kind of thing. So like, I can still do my radio content and people will still listen to it because people in some cases on YouTube will still listen to things. They'll still use the YouTube as like an audio player. So they're just going to continue to listen. And so a lot of the content I do, people will listen to. And listen, I'm like I'm a crapshoot when it comes to my YouTube channel. Sometimes I'll put something out that will get some retention and sometimes it won't. I can't really predict where my audience comes from. It's just very organic. I'm just starting to get some subscribers now because I learned some tricks on how to go and do that. But really, I'm so behind the game when it comes to it. Like, I've been doing the YouTube content for a couple of years now. Hasn't really got me much far. But for me, it's like I'm starting to grow an audience a little bit, which is nice. And there's certain things that I could put out for content that will definitely stand out and will really okay, this is what people want to listen to. So in the last year, I've had only a couple of videos that I've actually gotten a couple thousand views. So for instance, I put out among my popular downloads, the one I have the most downloaded right now of all is the ESPN Betrayal of Dan Le Batard, which is a When I'm Not Podcasting episode. And you can find on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/JBRASCO951. And the other one I did was one on Uber, talking about now that Uber now delivers alcohol. And that became something popular. So again, the ESPN Betrayal of Dan Le Batard, that got 3.6 thousand views. Again, I'm not getting millions of views on here, but I'm getting something. And then the Uber the Uber alcohol story got 1.4 thousand. I don't know, when I say 1.4, you think I'm just going to say like million or something. No, I'm not. No, sorry, I'm not that point yet. If I get a couple hundred downloads or a couple hundred plays or views rather on YouTube, that'd be nice. Same thing for my podcasts. Listen, I'm not, breaking the bank here and, getting like this humongous audience. I know I have a niche audience. I understand that. And on the YouTube feed, I also make it 18 years and up. So I make it all adult. Like, I don't want to make it where I can do content. And, most of my content is for adults. Like, I'm not worried about having a younger audience trying to play to everybody. But there are those out there that are listening in, and they realize that they want to go and be able to make content. So that's where you are being a broadcaster. This podcast is for you. If you want to understand how to make money from podcasting, and you want to understand how you make money from content, because you are broadcasting. Remember, you are casting a broad net to a lot of people by what you are putting out there. So broadcasting doesn't have to be television. It can be music, it can be movies, it can be radio, and it can be online in so many different ways. That's why I'm here to talk about it. And again, I'm in the support of creativity when it comes to all these fields. But all of you must understand where the direction of all the media is going, is that everybody's going online. So the mainstream, the established mainstream that's out there that we talked about in the last couple of weeks about the real two parallel roads, right? It's like two highways, two information superhighways. One is the established corporate mainstream of all the content that's being forced down us. Some of it is good, some of it is really not good. And some of it's being forced on us, it's being rehashed, retooled, remade. And then what happens is then there's the viral organic mainstream, the other highway, which is all the stuff that we really like. And then what happens is this is where things cross over, right? Before things got too big, there would be something would come out of nowhere and then make it into the viral organic mainstream, right? And then those would become so big that would be basically kind of sell out themselves and then be brought and inherited and brought and elevated into the corporate established mainstream. And that's where they are. So one of those videos I did, which I thought would get more views, but no, it hasn't done it yet, and that's okay, was going to be part of what my program is about tonight, which is the 10-year music cycle. which I think is really a fascinating story. It's a very radio industry centric thing, but this is an understanding of the evolution of content, because it's across the board that evolutionary change happens, whether people expect it or not. There are those that are consultants and there are people that are in the know. There are smart people there that realize there are trends, there are things that are going to change. Things don't stay the same. They're not going to just stay static. They're going to evolve and move. And sometimes, which is what the corporate established mainstream does, they will tap into something that becomes what is old becomes new again. And it works. It absolutely works. Look, the Marvel Universe, they've already had several incarnations of Spider-Man. And DC's already had a bunch of incarnations of Superman and Batman, right? That's what happens here. And Wonder Woman, for a fact. These are the kind of things that happen here. It's just a constant change of motion. So things are still timeless, and then you just bring it, and then you just adapt it to a new audience. That's what happens here. So you give it a couple of generations. You go to the next generation. It's like, okay, here we go. Bring it back. That's the idea what they're doing here. And I understand where they're coming from with that. But again, if they only can do that, if they can't figure out how to make anything new because they have sucked the life out of the depersonalized, taking out any individual creativity or any ideology that can be brought into the space that is different. Because the only thing that does come out that's different in some of these areas are for the sake of trying to enforce diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to force a narrative. And let's be honest, sometimes it's a narrative that's being brought upon a high that says, okay, the powers that be that run these companies, they want to create a particular narrative that could be, whatever. That could have undertones of a social, political, or cultural movement. And that's why we get some of what we get. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that is what's being done. Let's just call it what it is. That is what it is. But you just need to be able to identify what is what. And just realize there is good, but again, there should be things that are merit-based. Like, it should be where the audience gets to pick what they want, what they watch. And they should not be forced to watch something they're not going to like because they're going to resist, they're going to refuse it. People are already refusing with their dollars and their viewership by going to online. They're going to streaming because that's where they want to go watch their content. They are evacuating. They are leaving cable. They are leaving network. They're not going that route of an ad-supported model anymore. They're willing to pay a premium subscription for ad-free content. And now, that was what it originally was. People wanted to go and watch stuff ad-free. Now, they want to watch premium content because that's where the good content that they like is. Because the ad-supported content, for the most part, is not good enough to keep people engaged. Or there's something else going on with those shows or that programming. And that's what's happening. Because you notice there's only certain programming that will stay around that'll be ad-supported. And for the most part, it's live sports and a couple of different events that, that come on television when it comes to, competition shows or game shows. Those will keep people with ad-supported content. They'll watch and engage. But not even the numbers they used to be honest. Let's go into the 10-year music. So Guy Napoleon, Guy Zapoleon, that's the name I meant to say. Okay, he has been a programmer. He's worked at stations like Top 40 station KZZP in Phoenix, created the first hot adult contemporary station, Mix 96.5 KHMX in Houston, and he has worked with some of the best radio stations around the country, including Z100, Kiss FM, KS95, and others across America and worldwide. He worked at stations like 2J FM in Australia, NRJ in Paris, and 104.6 RTL in Berlin, Germany. So that's what he's done. And also he worked with Steve Rivers to launch WKTU FM in New York City. So here's basically what the rundown of what he says about the music cycle. As the great Maya Angelou said, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. To me, he says it's always important to look back at history to understand the future, which is one of the fascinating aspects within the 10-year music cycle I've written about since 1991. Now, in 2020, the music pendulum had swung back to the doldrums phase of the 10-year music cycle, which began in 1956. The music cycle repeats in 10-year periods, and that decades are often similar. As an eerily strange similarity between 1970s events and the music cycle that resembles the events of 1970 and the doldrums that occurred 50 years ago. So they talked about some of the things when it comes to, politics, sports, pandemics, the economy, generational divide, issues that were in the social construct, and other things. In the music at the time, in 1970 and 2020, the start of the 70s, the start of the 20s, they're saying that there were country crossovers, remakes, less pop hits, and top 40 radio ratings were lacking. So that goes across the board. Now, baby boomers were still talking about peace and love in 1970, but also the rise of anger against the government with the Vietnam War continuing. Then we move along about 2020 being a time period, that should have been a time period of protest music because they probably didn't like the government, and less recording sessions due to the pandemic, but protest songs against that were coming out. Now, they go into some more political stuff. I'm going to skip all that, but when it came to top 40 sounds then and now, at the time, your pure pop music in 1970 was Jackson 5, Love May Be Your Own, or ABC, or I Want You Back. Bobby Sherman, and I think, was it Julie, Do You Love Me? And there was, in 2020, you had The Weeknd with Blinding Lights, and Justin Bieber with Holy, and Yummy, and things, and Intentions, songs like that, his album that had come out. Same thing with The Weeknd. And, having, other songs, Heartless, things like that. The R&B in 1970 was The Spinners and Temptations. Then in 2020, it was the music of Chris Brown and DaBaby. Chris Brown had the song Go Crazy, went really well, and No Guidance. And DaBaby just had an album that went ahead and went crazy, had the song Rockstar he was part of, and other things. So you got that all in front of you. In country in 1970, it was Kenny Rogers and Anne Murray that dominated the charts. In 2020, you have Dan and Shay and Maren Morris that are in the mainstream of country. Now, pop rock in 1970, or would be considered alternative today, the Guess Who and Melanie. Guess Who did songs like American Woman, and Melanie did songs like Brand New Key, or what was that song? Lay Down something, I forget the whole song. In 2020, you had, groups like Panic at the Disco with High Hopes, and, Look Ma, I Made It. Hey, Look Ma, I Made It, right? And then Billie Eilish that had Everything I Wanted, and Bad Guy, and things like that. That's where we were with the songs. So now 1970 marked the end of the Beatles. Last album, Let It Be, came out that May. Then you had the release of the triple album Woodstock, music from the original soundtrack and more. And then the event and music from Woodstock served as a pivotal moment in popular music industry and defining event in youth culture. And up until COVID-19 hit, major outdoor music festivals were full flight with Coachella, Lollapalooza, Bonnaroo, as some of the huge cultural music events for teens and young adults. So you have doldrums. The top 40 radio stations, radios are lacking, and the music is kind of lacking. Then there's more country crossovers because that's kind of filling the role of what is out there in the mainstream music. And then older songs being remade. So in 1970, you had songs that were being remade. Frigid Pink's House of the Rising Sun, Rare Earth's Get Ready, Diana Ross's Ain't No Mountain High Enough. And there were some charting remakes, including Surf Mesa's ILY, which are just taking samples of older songs, Black Eyed Peas' Ritmo, Rip Mom Needs Put Your Records On. And then the percentage of pop hits were diminishing, which is apparent by looking at the Billboard charts. And you can see by looking at the sheer number of songs that were consensus songs that were really powerful songs that were like always top of the charts. There were fewer songs that were, what they mean by powers is they were consistently the most played songs on a top 40 radio station. There were not everybody was playing it because it was one of the hottest songs out there, and people just want to hear it over and over and over again. Now, songs like Adore You by Harry Styles, Blinding Lights by The Weeknd, Dua Lipa's Don't Stop Now, Circles by Post Malone, they were on the radio being played over and over for 3 to 4 months, longer than a normal stay, being the songs that you heard over and over, because they only should go for like about a month. And then you have that, unless they're really popular. But what happens is, because the music and what they're playing, because of how radio is so behind, and music also, there was just not that much music coming out, that, music would come in and would not get so popular, where radio would pick it up and then just sustain the length of what music is out there. That would just be, that would make radio popular. But radio doesn't stick up to that. And it doesn't broaden their playlist to what other songs that people are listening to in streaming. They're not willing to go that route. That's the whole point. In the year-end Billboard Top 100 in 1970, they said there was about a good 15% of the songs were country hits. Same thing's happening today. Now, in every major market in the country, there's not one station that's playing the hit music. The mainstream top 40 songs in the country, that is a number one station. That's one of the most popular stations, because there's a drop off of who's listening to it. Now, in the 1970s, it's because there's other music that also catered to a younger crowd. When the pop stations were not playing what was the representation of what was out there, or the music was just changing, then people would just not listen to it on the pop station. It would go to somewhere else. If you want to hear James Brown or Temptations or Spinners, you go to the R&B station. You go to the black station, that would be called at the time. Now, he says, does looking at the 70s tell us what music and the rebirth will look like in coming up in a few years as the decade progresses? Well, the music cycle has 3 phases. There is the pop phase, the birth phase, where the beginning of a cycle begins. So a lot of pop hits, rock, hip hop, and R&B are more pop, more melodic. Then we go to the extremes, where music starts moving to the edges. We get music that gets crossed over, that becomes something more. Dance music comes into play, really, like when grunge came out, right? Or, like heavy metal. Things, or like the glam rock kind of stuff. All that kind of changes. Then we get the doldrums. So when mainstream top 40, R&B and rock, all the different formats, they start softening. And much of rock and R&B is avoided entirely. So again, we don't have R&B music that's out there. Like, there is, but it doesn't get played at all. It's not even like considered mainstream at all. So like a Summer Walker or a Her or Jhené Aiko, or Jasmine Sullivan, they're not even considered in the same realm. Like, those songs don't get played enough on an R&B or a hip hop station at all, like an urban station. They don't play it. If they do, it's just not that much, because they're going to get overplayed by the rap songs. Because it used to be the R&B was played more and the rap was just kind of like in there, but it was like more like a 80-20, 70-30 kind of split. But then it's flipped in the last 10, 15 years. So now, the cycle always changes when a genre or an artist or a music platform brings about another change in music. And he is talking about how there is 7 cycles so far. So 1956, it was Elvis and really rock and roll coming into its own. The Beatles in 1964. Then we started in 1974 with the real rock, the anthem, the arena rock kind of feel to it. Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, the supergroups like Fleetwood Mac, and then Stevie Wonder coming out with great music. Then 1984 was really the MTV becoming mainstream, and every artist that came from that, whether it was Michael Jackson or Culture Club or, Prince or whatever you could think of. 1997, it would be the internet and Napster allowing for free music and trading files. Another music cycle began. And then where people were accessing their music and how it was getting popular was changing. And then 2005, it was the creation of American Idol, where you see where new artists start coming from the competition shows. So the Carrie Underwoods, the Fantasias, the Ruben Studdards, the Daughtries of the world, right? Or the Kelly Clarksons, of course, right? You have them coming into play. That's where The Voice would come from. That's where the X Factor would then come into play. That's where America's Got Talent would come into play. Then music cycle 7 is technology. When the smartphone and streaming music became commonplace, Spotify came in, iTunes had their streaming, and you had Pandora, and they were all in, playing, and up, and the mobile phones could support the streaming of all these different devices. Now, one of the things to talk about as well was when it comes to Billboard charts and what the radio stations are playing, the overfocus on pop music. And again, they show the charts going in the past decade, and that the Billboard charts, there would be in the last 3 years overemphasis of hip hop and R&B making up of at least half the charts throughout the year. Pop making up a third, and then anything was kind of like, like the easy listening type music, the adult contemporary music, the soccer mom music, rock and country make up the rest. When it comes to radio, the top 40 radio, they're not playing radio. It's contemporary hit radio that just more pop than anything else. So in the last 3 years, pop music on a top 40 station makes up 2/3 of what the format is. Hip hop and R&B make up roughly a fourth to a fifth, 20 to 25% of the format. And then AC, which is like like AC is like considered like songs like Louis Capaldi's Someone You Love, or Gabby Barrett's I Hope, or Maroon 5's Memories, things like that. Those songs make up about 10 to 15% of the format. And then what happens is some of these stations they're not so much top 40, they're becoming the hot AC. So what people were listening to when they were younger, listening to a hit radio station, they're listening to the hot AC station, like it's like the best of the 20s, the 2020s, the 90s, and the 80s kind of thing, right? And that's because people are listening to a whole gamut of music because they're, enjoying what other music was older, or they're just kind of adapting. Like some of the older audience that used to listen to just pop music, they've moved over and crossed over to this other station that kind of sounds the same way. Same kind of feeling, same kind of energy. That's what's happening. Now, top 40 has always been a reflection of the most popular genres, including crossovers from other formats, but it's been tapering off, and it's been done like that for a long time. That's the homogenization that companies like iHeartRadio and the CBS or now Intercom have done to the format. It's supposed to be top 40. It should not be just pop radio, because pop it doesn't represent everything, and it's not. Top 40 is a gamut of everything. When you look at the Billboard Hot 100, what Casey Kasem needs to play in America Top 40, that was what was represented. That's what it was. Now, when you examine streaming platforms and sales, hip-hop is without a doubt the most popular genre driven for music fans aged 12 to 24. And yet, contemporary hit radio has given hip-hop and R&B limited airplay. So again, when R&B and hip-hop are the most popular music right now on streaming, and that's what they're playing very little of on a hit radio station, on a top 40 station. So now, top 40 has been maintaining its focus on the pop genre with the percentage of spins staying above 60%, and that's for the last decade. And pop music has been dropping in popularity since 2018. And we're getting a lot of artists that are crossing over, being brought in. Now, there could be said things about how Billboard has changed their methodology, and where radio decided not to do the same thing. Now, why I talk about this is because of the fact that radio is a representation of what music comes on. For whatever reason, Billboard or the streaming services or the musicians, the artists, and the record labels, they still make radio important. It's relevant to them in the whole lexicon of what they're doing and how they put out music. Streaming is becoming more of a priority to them, but because of how the Billboard methodology of the charts are, because how they want those charts to do, which helps to gauge the sales, the streaming, and the success of an album or the era of an album and all the singles that come with it, radio is still an important component. It's still considered very important. That's why music, the way it's played, when it becomes mainstream, when it crosses over, because remember, that's 100 songs right there. And not all those songs get played on the radio. And also that not all those songs are very popular. Sometimes they're just part of an album bomb. They're just like of an album that just comes up and then comes back down. Or there's songs that come in now that we see from TikTok that just kind of bubble in, make their way and come back down. Like we see Corvettes coming on there, right? And there's other songs that an artist comes out with, it's like just kind of a promotional single, pops right up, comes right down. That's what happens. But radio doesn't represent that. They're still considered part of the representation of music today. But they are failing on that point. And this is what this story talks about with the music cycle. That music changes and then radio, and other formats, they don't follow along with it. And also remember, because of the music that's out there, music, we always know, does kind of perpetuate. It also propels what kind of things we're into when it comes to our television, our streaming, when it comes to what we watch in the movies, when we go watching the TV shows, because the music can also be used as the soundtrack of our current state of everything. Like there's certain current modern stuff, like, how many different shows do you know of that will play? Sometimes they'll play older music, but then sometimes they're playing a new song. And like that just identifies that era. Right? There's things that are kind of like in a time capsule of a show from a particular period that will then identify with that period of time. Whether it's a soundtrack to a movie or a TV show, or whether it's just music that's being played that is current at that time that encapsulates that moment of the culture. That's why it's important. And it's important to us because when we are doing our content, we're cognizant of what is going on because music changes so much. Because much like, TV and movies, we might see movies that are kind of reworked and redone. Music kind of has the same thing, but music is the true evolution. And music is one of the easiest things to consume that will then change our feelings, our emotions, our thoughts, everything when it comes to how we look, what we talk about, what we say, how we live our lives. It does have that much bearing, that much importance. That's why this is important to me. Now, programming music in 2021. So the idea is, how are we supposed to go ahead and, does radio, what do they do to kind of get people to keep notice? So the winning formula has always been pop, rock, and R&B. And not just pop. And yes, we still have some great pop artists creating great pop music. Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, The Weeknd, Dua Lipa. And we're hearing a lot of new songs that are coming in that, again, new artists come into play and they become mainstream. And we're seeing a crop of brand new artists that are coming right in. Like, look at this weekend. Look at this week right here, the Billboard Hot 100, #1 song in the country this week. Week ending January 23rd, Olivia Rodrigo's Driver's License, right? You have that as a #1 song, like just with a bullet. #1 to the top, and some people might not have recognized her 2 weeks ago. But January 9th, the song gets dropped, and there we go, just like that. Week and a half later, #1 song in the country, #1 song worldwide. Praised by a number of artists that are out there just saying, wow, man, this is like, here we go. And we see other artists coming into play. Like, listen, when you look at the change in music, in the reggaeton world, we're starting to see new artists coming into play. Like, Camilo's a new artist with the big funky mustache. Rosalia is the darling right now. She's like the new queen of reggaeton and urbano right now in Latin America. She's huge. And now she just put out a song, a crossover hit, really just like it's a really like a pretty blockbuster duet. Rosalia and Billie Ellish coming out, No Lo Vas a Olvidar, I think. Yeah, No Lo Vas a Olvidar, I think it's what it is. And that song just came out. I think they need a dance version of it because the instrumental, Phineas It's very cool, but let's get some dance version. Let's get a little bit of beat to it. Throw a dembo in there. So, okay, I need a dembo for a Rosalia song, seriously. And now she's also kind of duetting because she duetted with The Weeknd on a version of Blinding Lights. And Rosalia did a song now with Bad Bunny called La Noche de Anoche, which is a badass song. By the way, I really do enjoy it. And actually, I'm surprised more reggaeton has not made its way into mainstream. It's gotten a little bit here. Like, if you look at the streaming, there are songs that make it into the chart, and it's like Daquiti by Bad Bunny and Jay Cortez. It's a damn hot song. And like, maybe somebody would hear it on a pop station if they wanted to play it. And there's probably some stations that have a bit of a Spanish flair to it that are playing it. And there's just some songs that come from the Spanish realm. I mean, we even see now on the global hits chart for Billboard that like Japanese songs, like anime kind of like, you know, these Japanese pop songs are coming in here. K-pop we're seeing obviously with Blackpink and BTS. We're seeing a global change to it. So like including some of that would be nice this time around on the music cycle. Now, they also talk about how country songs are getting played now on the top 40 stations. So The Bones by Maren Morris, Gabby Barrett's High Hope, Dan and Shay's I Should Probably Go to Bed. You know, they're getting up to, and again, country's becoming much more pop anyway. It's much more mainstream than it ever was before because that music has evolutionized. Not so much string guitar or steel pedals and all this kind of stuff. Like they're getting rid of the twang more and more every day. They're becoming more rock oriented because rock lost its way, and more of the rock artists, or the established rock artists, they went to Nashville. As we learned from my interview with the morning mayor, Dave Pratt, right? It's the same idea. Now, by the way, go back and listen to that interview because it was really good, by the way. Okay, moving along. Top 40 radio airplays maintain the same genre balance for the last decade with very little variation. The key for top 40 success was an upbeat, pop-centered formula, which is what was actually happening in 1991. The music was energetic, it had drive, it was fast-moving, it had a pace, and people were just into it. And it was lively. It was like a party on the radio. 1991 was huge because you had house music. You had freestyle music. You had all this fast BPM, you know, really just like 125, 130 BPMs per minute. Everything was like that. But now it's just, everything is just slowed down so much for whatever reason. So now going back to the beginning of the music cycle, 1956, we also know that music moves in cycles. It's time to adapt to the genres that are more plentiful during each phase. Now he goes into other things here. The programming answer that what people need to hear is, when asked about the key to success in radio, play the fucking hits. Right now, besides pop, everything's else in the doldrums. That means more hip hop and R&B, more alternative, more slower adult contemporary ballads, and even more country. Now that it's time to, they're saying for the stations that you have to be very careful at this point in time to not go overboard and play everything that is in the top 10 or top 20 streaming charts. I disagree. I vehemently disagree. Now, here's why he says not to. Most radio listeners also stream music, but I believe at this point in time, the streaming charts are still dominated by a very active subset of listeners who aren't big consumers of radio, especially top 40 radio. So thinking songs on the top 20 of the streaming charts are radio hits is a mistake. But a way to identify those potential hits on streaming services and TikTok is to cross-reference them in sales and in other platforms like Shazam and Hit Predictor, and to look for the songs that do really well there as well. It's also a great time to pick music for top 40 as radio has never had as many tools to figure out the hits. But again, there is a guy, Mr. Zapolian, you have to understand, sir, that there are things that are going on that the corporate types are controlling the amount of songs in a playlist. Okay? The other thing, too, is that we're seeing when a song becomes a hit, listen, sometimes it's inevitable what a song is going to become a hit. Okay? When Driver's License came out, bona fide number one hit. And by the way, when you hear it, it sounds like a song that should be on top 40 radio. And it took 3 to 4 days for it to get there. As the song got to number one and was just breaking streaming records worldwide. When every other station out there, when stations around the world were playing it at number one and playing it a lot, America, where Olivia Rodrigo is based, late to the dance. Now, worldwide streaming, just because you're not worried about that, listen, your audience is dwindling, Mr. Zapolian. The audience is out there, Mr. Strategist. You need to explain this to your listeners, to the people that are listening to you, these program directors, these corporate consultants that are out there, these people for these radio stations, these radio companies, and make them understand, listen, you have a dwindling audience. They are eroding. So you're worried about them not being big consumers of radio because you know what? You're losing radio listeners. It's time for you to start bringing new people in to adopt radio again. It's not that hard. It really isn't. Like if I had $10 million, I'd go ahead and buy me a radio station right now and program it and do very well. I would do it. Not even a question. But anyways. Now, back in the 70s when the music cycle emerged out of the doldrums into rebirth, there were two genres producing more long-lasting hits than any other time in music. First off, we had the music that's now considered classic rock, progressive rock, arena rock, the all of that, glam rock, all of that. Okay? You had artists with like Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, all producing tons of hits in the 70s. Then disco, music being led by the Bee Gees, Donna Summer, Casey and the Sunshine Band, and then producing many rhythm and pop hits that helped revitalize top 40 radio. And in the 70s, radio played all genres of all hits, which is what streaming is today. All genres of all different hits. Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones got airplay on top 40, edging songs that many of today's stations are sonically staying away from. And the programmers in the 70s knew that those great genres. And by the way, streaming back in the day for like rock music, that's what the progressive stations, the freeform stations used to call them. That's what streaming kind of was. Because it was just a DJ playing the songs random. And something would be a hit, something would not. But again, it was a chance for you to go and find songs for yourself. Then you go look for the records and go listen to them. Now, the top 40 core audience at the time were baby boomers, but they were also smart enough to play the variety of hits that were expected to be on top 40, including adult contemporary country crossover. So like for AC, they're talking about, like you might hear Engelbert Humperdinck, After the Lovin', or you might hear a Songbird by Anna Murray or something like that. And the country crossovers, you might have Charlie Rich, The Most Beautiful Girl in the World, or, like Pickett. That's what they would do. Waylon Jennings, Looking Back, Texas. Think songs like that, right? The Devil Went Down to Georgia, Charlie Daniels Band. So songs like that. Now, the great news is we know from research that millennials and especially Gen Z types are more open to a wider variety of music. And that's why you see them taking up a bigger percentage on the Billboard charts than you do on the top 40 airplay charts. So it's a different time for radio with competition from streaming services. Radio has been adapting to broadcasting to its listeners whose listening habits have and will continue to change. But it's hurt radio, especially top 40, which hasn't had the ratings it had 5 years ago. So top 40 can beat the doldrums by taking a page from what the stations in the 70s did and not forcing pop music to be 2/3 of their playlists. Top 40 should play all the hits. I'm telling you, man, I'm hearing some air checks right now, some classic air checks from like the 1990s. And just hearing, like, if you heard some of the stations, like a Z100 or Kiss FM, or like the real top, big, large drawing, money-making stations that people all over listen to, okay, you would hear songs like either like a Gin Blossoms or a Foo Fighters, and then you'd move over to like a Dr. Dre and Tupac, or you'd move over to some kind of music from like dance like Sonique, Feel So Good, something like that, to a Macarena, to You Can't Touch Us, whatever it is. Like you would just have a full gamut, and there was just all this different music coming in, so much variety of music, so much different like pop punk, or you'd have whatever kind of house music you had coming in, some kind of novelty hits, all that kind of stuff was going on. Now, he's saying that, that means more hip-hop, more alternative, AC, and even country hits when songs from these genres show through all of our tools that they are also hits for the top 40 audience. If top 40 radio does that, it could experience a healthy rebirth period with more hits to play and better ratings. Exactly. But some of these stations want to play songs from a couple of years ago and just fill up the rest with older songs. They need to keep it new, keep it fresh, just like streaming is. Because people just want to go back to go listen to old stuff over and over. Because the listening habits are somewhat tweaked by radio. Radio is part of the equation. They need to be doing their part in the equation to help craft and create the mainstream culture we have today. And create room for new artists to grow and make their songs on the radio. Because then, if they're on the radio, that validates the streaming. It validates the social media presence. All those challenges on TikTok. I'm being serious about that. Okay. I've already gone an hour talking about this. Jesus, man. I didn't realize I was going to go so quick with this. Okay. I was planning to go ahead and put an interview out tonight, but I'm going to hold that off this week because I got so much into this 10-year music cycle, but I had so much to say about it. But I got a couple other stories I want to get to before we're going to wrap things up for tonight. Will movie theaters survive when audiences can stream new releases? I want to go into this story real quick. Thought this was important to go ahead and bring up. So let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. I really thought I just didn't think I was going so long, but man, I didn't realize I was going along with this. Harvard Business Review talks about this. And they said now about Warner Brothers announcing all the movies being released in 2021 will be simultaneously streamed and exhibited. We talked about that. And as we've talked about, the compromise now of all major Hollywood movies were previously having a 90-day exclusive theatrical release window before they were available on in-home channels, but that's getting shattered right now. As we know the story about the Trolls World Tour, we talked about it here on the show, how that was one of the first ones during the pandemic to go ahead and leave theaters and go direct to video for a premium price. And then while several studios released movies on digital channels, the announcement covered the entire 2021 slate. Movies slated for release in 2021, when most industry observers believe theaters will no longer be subject to COVID-19 restrictions. So the concerns reflect the conventional wisdom in the industry that given the choice, many consumers will avoid the big screen theatrical experience in favor of the convenience of watching the same movie at home. If that's true, it would obviously be ruinous for theaters. But is it true, they say. Will early digital releases significantly harm theatrical revenue? So they did a recent research study, and they found some surprising things. In the study, they analyzed what happened to theatrical revenue in Korea from 2015 to 2018, when Hollywood studios significantly shortened the theatrical windows for their releases from 3 months to 1 month. What they found out was after controlling for differences between movies and early digital releases versus traditional release windows, early releases had a statistically and economically insignificant impact on theater sales, less than a 0.8% drop. So it really didn't do anything with the movies when people wanted to go watch it in the theaters. Most theater goers, it turned out, remained loyal to the theatrical experience, even when they had the option of watching the movie at home while the movie was still showing in theaters. Now, U.S. consumers may behave differently than Korean consumers when it comes to early digital releases, and our study results only apply to movies that have received the exclusive window for at least 4 weekends. And their finding is consistent with what they've seen in other settings, where many feared that new digital products would cannibalize existing markets. So the digital disruption is only going to do so much for movie theaters. Somehow, some way, people are going to still want to watch their content, and are going to go to movie theaters to watch movies, new movies. Because also the other problem that they have is that it's just cost too much. Nobody wants to pay $19. Nobody's willing to go and pay $19 on top of their subscription fee to go ahead and watch a new movie. And also, it's only a rental that's only for a short amount of time. Like, some people are just not willing to go to that pay-per-view model, basically. John Fithian, president of the National Association of Theater Owners, said that theaters provide a beloved, immersive, shared experience that cannot be replicated. And whether that choice is enjoy a great new movie out of the cinema, to open up HBO Max, or to do both. So they say it's an encouraging sign. Maybe when it comes to how movies get released, studio executives and theater owners have more to agree on than they realize. So that's a good story right there. I like that. All right. I got one other thing I want to talk about, and I don't know, this is just too much time to go talk about this. It's going to talk about the business of media in 2021. I'm going to hold this off until next week because, man, I didn't realize I was going to go so long on talking about radio, but I really did. You know, I guess I could try to strap it in real quick. I'll go ahead and put it in right now. So here's what they're saying from the World Economic Forum. They talked about the shutdowns of location-based entertainment, which is concert venues, movie theaters, stage productions, festivals, sports stadiums, and more. Drop in ad spending among large marketers, and global entertainment and media revenue fell 6% from last year, 2020 to 2019. And they looked at the change going across media sectors, including gaming, music, advertising, film, and sports. And definitions of success in each industry are changing when it's difficult to generalize across sectors. The ease with which consumers can substitute media consumption, especially as boundaries between categories blur, means that real return on investment is dependent on media companies' ability to both create original content and keep consumers coming back for it. Now, using video content as an example, data from a survey from Antenna, they show that major movie releases during the second half of 2020, such as Hamilton and Wonder Woman 1984, were significant drivers of new signups for Disney Plus and HBO Max in the U.S. So that caused people to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to go ahead. And that's so subscriptions over the money they would have been making from putting the movies in theaters, right? That's the idea. As more media providers redefine their strategies to balance quality and quantity, they talk about the impact on the overall media landscape. So now, companies are putting the most weight behind streaming and finding that ring-fencing content might serve their interests for now, but may harm other parts of the value chain in the long term, because they're just trying to find the one spot that can still make money from these big corporations at the sacrifice of their other areas, of which they're just laying people off and just downsizing and micromanaging it. That's what corporations do. In the movie industry, for example, the trend toward direct-to-consumer releases works well for those with the scale and production capacity to produce and distribute by themselves, but will it spell the end of indie films that don't qualify as blockbusters? And are they considered too niche to be worth adding to a conglomerate's mass appeal library? If there's a problem with the internet's making, it's possible the characteristics of the web could also present a solution. Platforms such as Substack, TikTok, and YouTube, which attempt to match independent creators with audiences, provide the tools and distribution for a massive number of creators to potentially thrive, opening new channels for content tailored to specific audiences. But even here, discovery is very difficult without recommendation or curation. Only a small number rise to the top, and once there, the incentives for breaking away become stronger. Does this apparent concentration of power leave room for new discovery, or will make it harder for new creators to break through? And they said that also the scale of innovation and content creation still make this an exciting time for consumers. Finding ways to reconcile the opportunities with unintended consequences will lead to a stronger media industry in the long term. And the business of media will obviously be subject to regulatory oversight. So again, like they're talking about, there's so much space for media to be out there, and, you know, the business of it, there's, you know, the big corporations are trying to find their way to keep going forward, but then there's a lot of room for more media, even though the business of media might be different. There'd just be a lot more grassroots, independent, smaller types out there finding their voice and becoming, you know, trying to grow themselves grassroots, which is great, which is what I am, which is all of you are. Some of you are. I think it's very important that, of course, we have the two mainstreams, the two streams of mainstream that we have talked about here on the show. It's very important. Okay, it's an hour. I did it. I really didn't realize I was going to go so deep into the 10-year music cycle, but it's a fascinating article. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Coming up next week, I'm going to have an interview with strategist and a programming brand marketing maven, Lee Hunt. I'm going to talk about that, and I'm really looking forward to bringing you that interview next week here on the program. Come back and listen for that two-parter. I'll have part one for you next week. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and drop this here. Come back for another episode of the Broadcasters Podcast, and remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real Podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.